Okay. Hi, everybody. My name's Yehuda, and I'm an alcoholic. I am grateful today to be a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I want to thank Phil for asking me to speak. It's always a privilege whenever I'm asked to participate in my own sobriety. And I'm just grateful to be here with you folks today. If you would not mind, just indulge me for a minute or so. I'd like to open with the set aside prayer. That's something that I use internally for myself. I do this anytime I do anything involved in Alcoholics Anonymous. So just give me a minute and I'll do that. Lord, please help me set aside everything I think I know, everything I think I know about myself, everything I think I know about you, Lord, everything I think I know about my fellows, and everything I think I know about this 12-step program of recovery. All that I may have a new and open minded experience, a new and open minded experience with myself, a new and open minded experience with you, Lord, a new and open minded experience with my fellows, and a much needed new and open minded experience in my program with recovery. Please help me to see the truth. Amen. So I thank you for indulging me in that. Uh, so I'll just give you the basic facts, which I usually do, and that is I'll start off with I have a sobriety date, thank God, and that sobriety date is February 15th, 2010. I have a sponsor. His name is Yisrael C. He lives in Jerusalem, Israel. He has a sponsor, and I sponsor men in this program. Those I also, by the way, I also have a home group. My home group is the Common Solution Group in Las Vegas, Nevada. Those three things I've come to realize since I'm a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous are really significant. Without any one of those three things, I'm on a slippery slope. You know, I've got to have a sobriety date, which I do, thank God, by the grace of God. I have a home group and I have a sponsor, and I sponsor others. So those things kind of for me make up the triangle of the AA triangle. And I always like to share that. I think it's important for me to remind myself and to let you guys know also the type of program that I work. So I told you I have a sobriety date. I did not get sober, and I'm going to do my best to try to keep this in some type of order. What I was like, what happened, and what I'm like now. Like I said, I do my best to try to be in that space. Um, so why don't I just start from the beginning? To my knowledge, up until about 2 years ago, I got drunk for the very first time as a 12-year-old kid. But I've come to realize in the last 2 years, in speaking to one of my older cousins who was there and spent time with me, and I'm pretty close with still to this day, I actually got drunk as a 9-year-old at his bar mitzvah. Um, and what would happen to me that night, which was exactly this. I drank as much as I could, as fast as I could, and then I would apparently, and I only find this out later on, black out and get carried to the car by my parents. That was kind of how I drank. But the first time that I actually drank for the purpose, as the book says, men and women essentially drink for the effect produced by alcohol. Now, again, I don't know this in real time when this is happening as a 12-year-old, but I was at a family gathering. It was a religious thing. I'm a Jewish kid from New York, and I was there with all of my family members, my parents, grandparents, niece, cousins, the whole family. And it's at what's called a Passover Seder. It's not so important that you have any idea what that is, but part of this deal was that we're supposed to drink 4 cups of wine. And I'm a 12-year-old kid, and this year I get to sit with my older cousins, who were some of them are 3, 4, 5 years, maybe 6 years older than me. And I was incredibly uncomfortable, not with them, but sitting there because I'm like the youngest one at this table. And um, so we're required to drink these 4 cups of wine. And just so you guys have some reference what I'm talking about, we're talking about Manischewitz. If you've ever experienced that, it is sweet, it is nasty, it is not a pleasurable thing to drink, right? But as a 12-year-old kid, I feel as if I'm on the outside looking in, sitting at this table. And what are they talking about? They're talking about all really cool stuff. They're talking about the concerts they go into at the Fillmore East, and they're talking about seeing Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix and the Grateful Dead. And I love this stuff as a 12-year-old kid. So I'm enthralled with this, but I feel like I'm on the outside. So what happens to me is I start drinking this wine. Now, I wound up drinking way more than 4 cups, and I drink really quickly. unbeknownst to me, because I like that effect that's produced by alcohol. It does something to me. It starts to go in and I start to feel the warmth. And the next thing you know, as opposed to me being on the outside looking in, I'm cracking jokes. I'm right in the middle of everything. I go from being an observer way up in the bleacher seats to be right down in the middle of the field, a part of everything. And that would characterize for me, even at a young age of that, how I would drink. And here's what happens. I get really sick. And I remember this literally like it was yesterday. I run to the bathroom and I puke my brains up. And I'm throwing up through my nose and all the disgusting stuff that some of us may have experienced. I don't want to get graphic about it, but then this is what I do. I sit back down at the table and I pour myself another goblet of wine and continue to drink. Now, I don't know if any of you guys can identify with that, but again, this is how I drink. And I pass out, and I remember being carried to the car by my parents. So at 13, 14 years old, I'm in junior high school, and my drinking starts to take on a pretty regular basis, not during the school week, but come the weekends. Come the weekends, we'd go up to the school and hang out, and we'd buy out bottles of Boone's Farm apple and strawberry wine, also nasty stuff, but it did the job. And we'd go to school dances. But I lived for that stuff. I lived for Friday. I didn't even have to have the alcohol in me on a Wednesday, let's say, but I knew come Friday, I'd be going up to the school and hanging out. And I remember getting invited by guys on the varsity football team. I played junior varsity football at the time, to hang out with those guys. And again, I'm a little socially awkward. I'm a little uncomfortable. So what do? Because I see that this is working already for me. I start to have some idea that drinking alcohol is like a social lubricant. It allows me to participate. It allows me to be part of. And I would get blasted every single Friday night throughout my entire junior high school and high school career. But the same kind of things would always happen to me. I always drank more than I intended to. And once I started, the only thing that was going to stop me was basically one of two things: that there was nothing in a 5 mile radius, or I actually passed out. As I come to learn later on, I actually black out, meaning it's like sleepwalking. I didn't know this for a long time, that that's what blacking out was, right? So it's not like I'm passed out on the couch and I'm not moving. I'm doing all kinds of stuff. And this inevitable thing happens. The next day, friends is coming to me going, dude, do you have any idea what you did last night? And the minute they say that, I get like a twist and a knot in my stomach, because I have no idea what I did, because I'm on autopilot. I'm doing all kinds of crazy things and highly inappropriate things as well. That's, again, just to give you an idea, to qualify. This is how I drink. And this would characterize how I would drink for the majority of um, my life until I got to this place. And I know I'm going to kind of jump ahead a little bit. So there I was again in junior high school and high school. Um, I'm a musician. I play in a band, and my life becomes all about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And I'm only going to share this in a brief way in this context, with respect to our traditions. I am an alcoholic. I want to make that clear. But I did indulge in drugs throughout my drinking career. And I come to realize in retrospect that me using other substances was, in a sense, in a real way, for me to control and enjoy my drinking. I used it to treat my alcoholism. I am not a drug addict. I want to be really clear about that. I'm an alcoholic who used drugs to treat his alcoholism. I only come to learn this way later on in my life in looking at my drinking career. But I recognize that that's what I did. So my life is all about music. It's about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. This is the late 60s, early 70s, and that's just what I did, and I chased after that stuff for the longest possible time. Um, in 1983, I met a woman, and we got married. And at that juncture in my life, I made a conscious effort to myself that I was going to put down all of this wild lifestyle that I had lived up until that point in my life. I still played music. And don't get me wrong, this was not getting sober. But in my mind, I was eliminating all of these other things that I was adding to my life, and I just stopped doing them. Now, got to be honest, stop doing the majority of them. For me, smoking weed was not like taking drugs. that was just what I did. I was that guy. What I call used to like to call breakfast of champions. You know, beers and bong hits. That's kind of what I did. Um, but I made a conscious effort and walked away from that stuff and didn't really have any kind of any problem in a sense with that. Now, again, this is not being sober, and I'm clear of that. The word sober does not enter my lexicon in any way, shape, or form. It has nothing to do with my existence, man. Like, it doesn't even occur to me. And to be quite frank, I never really had any what looked like outside horrific consequences that some of us have had. Um, my alcoholism, as I see in retrospect, really manifested internally in myself, not outwardly so much. Um, anyway, I get married in 1983, and we make a conscious decision. My ex-wife, I should say, um, made a decision that as part of our spiritual journey, which was religious journey, we were going to pick up and planned we were going to move to Israel and raise our family, which is what we did. Um, and I lived in Israel up until 5 years ago, from the mid '80s, and that's where I raised my family. Anyway, I continued to drink, but it always looked like these. It was mostly weekends. There were times when my drinking got to a point where I would drink on a daily basis, but it didn't continue that way. See, my alcoholism for me had this what I considered to be like it was weird. It didn't get to the point where it was a continuum. It kind of had these peaks and valleys to it. Where there were times where I drank on a daily basis, and there were times where I didn't. But I did recognize this idea, and I've come to see this in retrospect. Again, a lot of this is we live our lives going forward, but I realize certain things I can only see in retrospect, in a rearview mirror type of thing. And a lot of this comes from obviously uncovering and discovering through the step process, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I raised my family. I have a job. I have a home. I have a mortgage. I pay my bills, and seemingly, I live a pretty normal life, except internally. Internally, I'm suffering from untreated alcoholism while I continue to drink. To make a very long story short, that marriage did not survive my alcoholism. And after 20 years, we got divorced. We have four beautiful children, got divorced, and that is when my drinking, once again, not based on circumstances, but based on the fact that knowing in retrospect that I'm an alcoholic, I'm bound to drink. The circumstances outside really have nothing to do with that. I can convince myself, right? My alcoholic life seems like the only normal one. I can't distinguish the truth from the false with regard to my own drinking. And that's kind of how I was. I lived a life, and I like to classify it kind of like this. That I was a rebel without a clue. I had absolute cluelessness about my drinking, about my alcoholism, and about the damage and the harms that I'm causing to all the people I care the most about. I'm really clueless, man, in my own existence. I really am. And it's starting to really internally, like bit by bit, eat me alive from the inside out. I heard this really interesting perspective on this, and I'll try to get this right. I have a friend of mine in AA who likes to talk about this story about, that if you throw a frog into boiling water, autonomically it will jump out of the water. But if you put a frog in tepid water and slowly, incrementally turn up the heat, the frog will boil and will die. That's how my alcoholism was. But I'm unaware of this. I'm absolutely clueless in my own existence. As I said, got divorced, and by the grace of God, I met someone else, and we got married. And this is a number of years, and I'm kind of skipping around this because I really want to get to the recovery part of my story. But I do want you to know that I am an alcoholic. I do not have the ability to control and enjoy my drinking. While I try desperately to do that, to control and enjoy my drinking, I can never get those two things in the same zip code. And if I did, it was maybe for a small piece of time. Whenever I drank, I had the absolute inability to shut it down. Like I said, the only thing that would normally stop me was that there was nothing else to put in my body in a 5 mile radius, or I passed out or completely blacked out and then went out looking for this stuff. That's how I drink. Anyway, I get remarried. We're also living in Israel. And my alcoholism is starting to take an effect in that relationship as well. Um, and so I considered that I'm going to moderate Here's where the interesting part comes, dude. I'm going to moderate my drinking. I'm going to control this because I believe I can do this only because I had the delusional idea that I walked away from all of those other substances in the early 80s seemingly with no negative effect. I didn't have to go to a rehab. I didn't have to go to a detox. I didn't have to do any of that stuff. I just made a decision on my own through my own willpower that I am not going to do those things. So this is kind of setting me up for my delusional thinking about my alcoholism, which I couldn't even identify myself as an alcoholic. And I'll share this with you guys. Growing up in New York, I spent a lot of time in my early years, in my teen years, in my early 20s in Manhattan, in New York, going to a lot of concerts, playing music as well. And I knew what an alcoholic was. An alcoholic was a guy laying in the street with a brown paper bag, homeless, drinking out of a bottle. That's not me. I own a home. I pay my bills. I have a job. I'm responsible. So I'm already in this idea that I cannot disseminate or see the true from the false about myself. And I see this and I convince myself, I just really like the effect produced by alcohol. I like getting loaded and I'm going to control this thing. I am going to work super hard. And there I am in the control tower, tweaking and pulling the dials, and I'm trying to control everything that I do. And unfortunately, I come to this realization that something's up, something's wrong with me. I can't do this. Why can't I do this? I look around, I look at my friends who I've known for decades. They seemingly can drink with impunity, with no problem, and they walk away from it. I don't have that ability. Again, cluelessness. I live in this place of delusion, and I'm clueless about my alcoholism, which I couldn't identify at that point. I finally get to this space in 2010. So I told you from the age of 12, which is 1969 for me, 1969, 1970 to 2010, I am drinking pretty consistently throughout this with these waves of stuff. And it was really tearing me up. I got to this place where I said, I'm going to make it again. I'm going to make this concerted effort. I'm going to do this, man. And I remember for like the last several months of my drinking, I remember saying, I'm going to go out. I'm buying four beers, and that's all I'm going to drink. Right? Okay. You know, self-reliance, self-reliant. I'm a pretty self-reliant guy. I played sports as a kid and I learned this thing that you just gotta just tough it out, no pain, no gain, and you'll get through this. So I would go and that's how it started. I'd buy four beers. Now, mind you, I look for the beers with the highest alcohol content, 16-ounce beers. I buy four beers. I bring them home. I sit out and I drink one. And every day this would happen. I would drink one beer. Maybe I would start the second beer and something inside of me would I can't even describe what that was. Almost like I changed my mind. And I'm sure you've heard this before that, yep. And I would turn to my wife and I'd say, you know what, babe? I miscalculated. I miscalculated. I got to go back to the store and get more. And I never drank four beers, even though I was determined. And every day I would do the same thing. And this went on for a couple of months, several months, as a matter of fact, where I would say to myself, four beers, that's it. I'm done, finished. But I would never drink four beers, no matter what I did. And I started to really become concerned about this. I really started to be concerned that why don't I have the power to stop doing this? What is my problem? It's almost as if I'm drinking against my will. And I will just now tell you the story of my last drunk because I think it's very indicative once again. On February 14th, 2010, my wife worked as an admin in a synagogue and they were having their annual banquet. And I really didn't want to go, but I'm doing the right thing. I'm going to this thing, and so I pregame a little bit as I would tend to do. So I'm comfortable. As I told you, this goes back to me, this 12-year-old kid. Put me in a socially awkward situation, and I convince myself I need something to lubricate me so I can interact with other human beings, right? Anyway, I pregame a little bit, and I forgot to tell you a very important part. I had determined quite some years before that my problem was hard liquor. See, if I only drank beer or wine, it wasn't that bad because I didn't get totally blasted, or excuse my expression, I didn't get totally shit faced. Okay. Um, and so I determined through my own experience that if I stay away from scotch, vodka, and bourbon, I can pretty much get through things without really causing too much havoc. So I had not drank any of that stuff for the longest time. For the longest time. I will tell you this though, I did have an experience with wine where I said, I'm going to drink wine and wine will be okay. And what would happen to me is I'd start out and I drink a bottle of wine, which for me was one mug, a liter mug that I had. I'd fill up with a bottle of wine. Now I don't see this. This to me is all normal stuff. I fill up the bottle. Yeah, I fill up the liter mug that I had in my beer stein. I fill it up with an entire bottle of wine and drink that. And then the strangest thing happened. I'd want to drink more. So I figured out what the problem was. The problem was probably the sulfates in the wine. That's what the problem was. I'm only going to drink organic wine. This is right out of the big book. I don't know this then, but this is it's only organic wine. That's what I'm going to do. Only drink organic wine. I should be okay with that. But it never happened. So then I get to this place where I told you about the 4 beers. So now let me tell you the story of my last drunk. So I pregame, I walk into this room and it's a big banquet hall. And I see the minute I walk in the door, it's to the back of the room. I see all these glistening bottles. There's bottles with white liquids and bottles with brown liquids. And it's almost as if this was calling me and drawing me like a magnet to that. Now, I told you, I knew hard liquor, bad move. Yehuda, don't do it, man. It's not a good thing. You're in a public setting. You're your wife's work with her colleagues. Don't do it. I was powerless in that moment. And I can tell you this. I walked up to that bar. I do remember ordering a double scotch, and that's all I remember. But I do remember this. At the end of the night, I was once again, as almost a 53-year-old man, carried to the car, just like I was when I was 12. That's how I drink. That's what alcohol does to me when I put it in my system. I am powerless over alcohol. Absolutely powerless. As much as I can think that I'm going to control and enjoy my drinking, I can never get those two things in the same place at the same time. Thank God. In retrospect, thank God. And what I can tell you is towards that end, the days and the weeks preceding that, no matter what I drank or no matter what I put in my body, yes, I would get drunk. I'd get a little buzzed from this stuff. But what didn't happen was what used to happen to me was that I'd have some freedom, freedom from worry, freedom from care, freedom from anxiety and fear. Those things stopped working. Alcohol literally stopped doing what it had done for me for all those decades prior. And in retrospect, thank God that that was the case, because you would have a different speaker tonight. I promise you, I would not be here. That's the truth, because alcohol stopped doing what it used to do for me. And that was truly a miracle. It wasn't at the time. It was awful because I didn't understand what was going on with me. As much as I put in my body, I still could not get free. I could not get that ease and comfort that having some drinks produced. Thank God. And here's the wonky part of my story. But this is my story. Um, I did not have a drink or any other substance for almost 3 years, but I didn't come to AA. I thought, just like I had, and that's why I told you that story in 1983 when I put aside those other substances and didn't have to do anything about it. I thought this would be the same thing because I don't recognize that what I have is alcoholism. I don't know that. I'm clueless. So I just thought all I need to do is just not put the substance in my body, alcohol. Once I don't drink alcohol, I can go along my merry way. Now, I will tell you this is important. For me, it was important because, like I told you, self reliance. I'm a self reliant guy. Did not go to a detox, did not go to a rehab. I detoxed from alcohol and other substances in my home with my wife, and I almost died. I did not know that if you try to stop drinking alcohol after decades of drinking alcohol, you can die from seizures. But again, that's my delusion. That is the guy who thinks he knows everything, who is the master of his destiny, that I'm going to work this out and figure it out. by the grace of God, and I know this was God because it wasn't me, I did not die from seizures. I got past that physical detox from those substances on my own, but it just wore me the hell out, man. I was afraid constantly. I was in absolute fear of everything in my head. My head would not shut off. Um, but I wasn't drinking and I wasn't putting anything else in my body. So I said, I guess this is how it's going to have to be for me, that it's going to suck. One day at a time, it's going to suck. And that's what I spent almost 3 years of pure abstinence with no solution to treat my alcoholism. Now, again, in retrospect, I didn't know that I needed to treat my alcoholism. I thought that I'd just go along my merry way. You know, life's going to be hard. It's going to suck. You're going to be highly uncomfortable. You're not going to. The one thing that I could tell you was the underlying thing. I absolutely was beyond my capacity to experience any joy whatsoever. That's how bad it was. And I would face every day. The only way I could describe it still to this day is like this, armed to face the world, armed to face the world. And it was awful, man. I was in absolute fear. And it was incredibly spiritually, physically, and emotionally painful for me. And I said, wow, this sobriety thing really kind of blows. It sucks. I don't know how I'm going to do this. So, by the grace of a loving God, and this is really true, I spent that time, I knew that I was relying on God, and I'll explain to you why. I was a religious person who prayed 3 times a day for the longest time of most of my adult life. And I had this very adversarial relationship with God. Nonetheless, I did all these ritualistic things, but in having an actual relationship with God, I did not. God was more of a butler or a servant to me. I would make demands of God and then get pissed off when he didn't give me what I wanted. That was my relationship with God. I wake up that morning of February 15th in a walk in closet, curled up in a fetal position. And for the very first time in my life, I called out to God in an earnest and genuine way, knowing that of my own, I could not drink. And I asked for help. What I did do after that was for that almost that entire period of that 3 year period was I spent obsessive time in prayer, but it was not in a pleasant way and it was not in a spiritual way. It was more out of absolute fear because I knew that it was God that was helping me stay sober. But I had this perspective of God that I had put God in this box and I demanded all of these things from him. So I set a benchmark for myself that if I wasn't praying properly, I wouldn't stay sober. So I would literally spend hours in prayer, afraid to face the world, honestly. And it got really bad for me. But by the grace of God, I have 2 young nephews who recently just celebrated a decade each, who were very new in Alcoholics Anonymous. And they saw me in this state of abstinence, knowing that I hadn't had a drink. And all I was doing was just kind of, and I didn't even know this term, white knuckling it, right? I never heard that before. Like I said, I was doing this. This is how I faced the world. And they came to me and said, hey, you know, why don't you come to AA? You might hear something that'll help you. Please excuse my language. I don't know. No one told me, Phil didn't tell me whether or not you can curse here or not, but I'm just going to use it in this context because this is how it was. I turned to both of these guys and I said, why the fuck would I go to AA? I haven't had a drink or a drug in almost 3 years. Now I recognize again, that was this bravado. That was whistling in the dark, as the book refers to it. That was me being self reliant, right? And I blew them off. But thank God, as young as they were in AA, they were taught to carry a message. They were taught to carry a message. Very subtle. They didn't whip out a big book and start reading stuff to me because they already saw that I was closed minded to anything they had to say. But little by little, little pieces of what they had to say to me about themselves and their experience, which is what we do here. And that's why I'm here, sharing about what I went through in the hopes that someone will identify, that can see a piece of themselves there. Eventually, they came to me again and asked, and I thanked them nicely and said no. But something happened to me. I can't tell you the day and I can't tell you when it was, but it's almost as if my armor that I was wearing, a little crack opened up in that, and a little bit of that light shone into my soul. And I said, the way you're going about this, you can't experience any joy. Maybe there's something to what they're telling you. Why don't you go and check out one of these AA meetings? That was a God moment, a really powerful God moment for me, because it wasn't me. It really wasn't. My attitude was shut this down. I don't need any of this crap. I'm just going to go along. You know, I'm going to be self-reliant once again, and I'm going to handle this. I remember walking to this AA meeting. By the way, I should tell you, this is in Jerusalem, Israel. Okay, they told me where the meeting was, and it was a good thing that they didn't come and pick me up and walk me there. I realized that in retrospect also. I needed to put one foot in front of the other of my own volition and show up to this meeting. And I remember walking there, having this, if anyone could identify with this, the debating society in my head was going back and forth. There's a waste of time. Why are you wasting your time? You really shouldn't go. And the other part of me is going, well, you might hear something. Yeah, but then the others on the other side of the coin, you'll get these guys off your back. They won't bother you. Anyway, back and forth, back and forth. And as I get close to where the meeting is, which by the way was in a bar, place called the Comedy Basement. You have to go down these steps to get to this place. It was in a bar. And as I get close, a miraculous thing happened for me. I hear laughter. I hear these people in a joyous way. And as I walk down, I recognize a few people who I'd known. My two nephews are there as well. They greet me. They start to introduce me to people. And the joy that I heard these people having, as I told you, I could not experience joy to the point that I didn't even want to play music. I didn't want to listen to music. All of those things, it was beyond my capacity to experience any joy whatsoever up until that point. But something happened. And this was part of the miracle of what I see as AA. There was something that attracted me to this. I was like, and I couldn't understand this. These are sober people. How are they laughing? How is there joy in their eyes, in their heart? How are there smiles on their faces? That was not my experience being sober, abstinent. I walk into this meeting, and this is where the miracle for me happened. And I'll use a quote from Scott Redmond of blessed memory. He said, alcoholism is contagious. We catch it through our ears. When I first heard that years later, I identified it as exactly what happened to me because I walked into that meeting and I sat myself down and I listened. And somewhere in the middle of this meeting, somewhere, this like mind blowing thing occurred to me that if this is what alcoholism is, what you're describing, if that's alcoholism, then I have alcoholism. That's what's wrong with me because I could not figure out what was wrong with me when I'm not putting anything in my body. My alcoholism truly kicked my ass when I stopped drinking. That's when it became unmanageable. That's when my life became unmanageable to me, is when I went through that period of abstinence. Anyway, in that very first meeting, I was able to identify that if what you're sharing about, what you're talking about, your feelings, your experiences, if that's alcoholism, then that's what I have. It was the first time that I ever had any inkling as to what was wrong with me. At the end of that meeting, I asked around. I said they were talking about all these various things, and it's like when you first come to AA, at least for me, you guys were speaking a foreign language. It's like I didn't get the lexicon, the dictionary. You were talking about all sorts of things that were way beyond my capacity, but I was able to identify that if that's alcoholism, that's what I have. And I asked someone to sponsor me, and I bought a big book because that's how desperate I was. As much as I had all this bravado and whistling in the dark, and I don't need this stuff, and I'm going to self-reliant, and I'm the master of my destiny, and I'm just going to do this on my own. That was the miracle for me. That by just hearing in one meeting someone talk about their alcoholism, what they were like, what happened, and what they're like now, I was in. I had to have this thing, as the book refers to at the beginning of the book. That sponsorship didn't work out, which is perfectly fine. Nonetheless, I found someone and asked them eventually, after about a month or so of having that relationship that didn't seem to work, to take me through the steps. And that's where I started to have this real sense of uncovering and discovering who I am, what I'm about, what makes me tick. And that's through the step process. Even just building up to getting to step one, I had an incredible spiritual experience through the doctor's opinion. That was what I needed to have some idea as to What is this thing that I experienced all those times? Demanding and insisting I am not going to drink, but nonetheless, once I start, I can't stop. What is that? Where does that come from? So this idea of identification through working with a sponsor and going through literally line by line of the doctor's opinion, I was able once again to start to build this foundation, which I'm going to need to go through the steps. This foundation of, yes, I am an alcoholic. I can admit to my innermost self, I am alcoholic, and my life is unmanageable by me. Lack of power continues to be my dilemma. So I go through this process bit by bit, slowly by slowly, and I start to uncover causes and conditions about myself through the step process. And I start to be able to act in a different way in how I treat the people around me. And that's through really tremendous sponsorship. And I just want to share this. That man who took me through the steps, his name was Mel D, just passed away this past week, the last weekend. Passed away as a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and one of the sweetest human beings. Really showed me a new life, a life that I can have just by watching him put one foot in front of the other, how he lived his life. And it's funny when I talk and when I work with guys today, often I hear him in my head, what he shared with me and the things that have given me the foundation here in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm forever grateful to this man. And I just pray that he rest in peace. And he was really a sweet man, gave of himself to me and to the other guys that he sponsored. It was kind of cathartic in a way, you know. Anyway, I don't want to get caught up on that. It'll get emotional for me. But my point is, so how free do I want to be? I ask myself all the time, how free do I want to be? I want to be free from the bondage of self. And I can only do that when I start to develop a relationship with a power greater than myself. And in order for me to do that, I had to take this God that I always believed in since a child. See, belief in God was never a problem for me. It was never a problem for me. Maybe problems for others, but that was not my issue. My issue was I realized in retrospect through a lot of inventory work to even get before step 4, but in steps 2 and 3 to really recognize that while I believed in God always, I had absolutely zero trust in this power. I was self-reliant. Self-reliant failed me when I drank, and self-reliance will continue to fail me in sobriety if I rely on self. If I am that guy who continues to believe that I am the master of my destiny and I got this, and I'm going to figure this out and I'm going to make it work. I used to be a guy who carried a 5-pound sledgehammer, banging round pegs into square holes. Today, by the grace of a loving God, not so much. I got a little brush with some WD-40 and I spray a little bit and I tweak it a little bit because I have to be reminded of this. You know, do not be discouraged. No one among us is able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. I'm not perfect. I will never be perfect. Thank God. I sought perfection. And that was part of my dilemma I had with God that I also like to classify today as my arms are too short to box with God. I don't have that relationship. So in order for me to start to get, excuse me, to get through the step process of 2 and 3, I had to basically take a real look at my relationship with this power that I always believed in. And I realized I had put God, and I use the word God just so if it turns anyone else off, just as a place marker. You know, I realize it can be anything to anyone. It doesn't matter. I just do that because it's a simple way of doing it. So don't be discouraged by that God thing. I know people get turned off by that. I did actually for a bit as someone who believed in God. Anyway, I had to take the walls down from the box that I had built, that I had put this God into. And it was a difficult process because I had to really be honest and look at myself. What is this relationship like? I had given God my worst character defects. I had made God petty, revengeful, short-tempered, and that's how I viewed this God. And I started to change my perspective. And I recognize today that through the step process, what we do, what I try to do on a daily basis is have a different perspective of what I see and what I hear. I start to shift. There's a paradigm shift that starts to happen and happen through me. The miracle of the steps themselves. I I also like to refer as not working the steps, but as the book says, taking these steps. There are actions involved in this. And I always ask myself, change can only happen when it's manifested through action. Surrender can only happen to me through acceptance. All this stuff was like, I'm clueless, as I told you. I don't understand any of this stuff. And I don't have to understand it. I just got to do it, really, essentially. So I start to shift and change and have a real genuine relationship with this power greater than myself. Because I can tell you this, I come to Alcoholics Anonymous at that moment when I came here, and I only realized this again in retrospect. I was beyond human aid. I thought I could fix me. Clearly, I could not. Lack of power is truly my dilemma, but I believed I had that power. I believed I was the master of my destiny, and I recognize I am no longer that. I am just a humble servant to the best of my ability in real time. How can I fit myself to be of maximum service to God and to my fellows? For me, this alcoholic, I've got to shape shift to fit myself to be of maximum service. That does not occur in a natural way for me. It is absolutely counterintuitive. And through that process, I start to become free. And again, I ask myself on a daily basis as I spend my time in my prayer and my meditation as a vehicle for having conscious contact with my higher power. You know, I got confused at the beginning with this prayer and meditation. I used to think that that was the point. Prayer and meditation was the point. It's not. If you really look at the step, it's through prayer and meditation that I create this conscious contact, because I am no longer the master of my existence. There is a power greater than me that runs the show. And I had to come to that understanding. And I did, slowly but surely, with a lot of resistance. I don't know if anyone else can identify with this, man. My resistance is still there. I wake up every day, my hard drive gets erased. I've got to start from square one. I've got to live in 24-hour increments, because that's the only place I really can live. You know, I spend a great deal of time in early sobriety, and sometimes it happens now where I am not present in the very moment where my feet are. I'm projecting doom and gloom in the future, or I'm looking at the wreckage of the past. It's only here in this very moment that we exist. In real time, can I meet this power greater than myself? Can I have conscious contact with the God of my understanding? You know, and for those who might be new, you know, we hear this idea, God of my understanding. When I first heard that, and I had to ask my sponsor, he told me very on, this first sponsor who just passed away, Mel, of blessed memory, used to say to me, there are no stupid questions. The only stupid questions are the ones not asked. So if you don't understand something that we're talking about, we're reading, please ask a question. That was giving me permission, as opposed to my pride preventing me from asking, because I don't want to let him know I don't know things, you know. And he would say to me, this power, it's a matter of having the connection with this power. It becomes about God reliance as opposed to self-reliance. That helps me to step out of the bondage of self. And I'm grateful for this entire process. I just want to read one small thing out of the big book. Um, it's one of my favorite things, which reminds me on a daily basis. And that's on page 53 in the chapter, um, in this chapter. And it says, when we became alcoholics, crushed by a self-imposed crisis we could not postpone or evade, we had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else he is nothing. God either is or he isn't. What was our choice to be? And I have to remind myself of this every single day, because I can revert in a heartbeat, in a blink of an eye, to Yehuda once again being the master of his destiny and being self-reliant, as opposed to shifting towards God reliance. And I get to see that on a daily basis working with others. You know, for me to have to, I remember when I first got my first commitments, you know, where I was told to be of service. I was like, I don't want to do this stuff. It's not for me. I'm not that guy. I'm not a service guy. But I start to do this because I recognize that the longer I stay in AA, if I come to AA to get, it's going to become really pedestrian real fast. It's only through giving do I actually get. You know, when I give of myself to others, that is stepping out of the bondage of self. And I can only do that in real time. So I try to the best of my ability in real time to suit up to show up, to be a part of, as opposed to being the guy who's like, nah, this is inconvenient. I was taught a long time ago. The things that I do in AA, especially within the context of my home group, these are commitments. These are a part and parcel in what I do as a sober member of AA. These are the sort of like taking out an insurance policy to some degree, because I'm not living in the bondage of self. What about me? What about my needs, my wants, my priorities? It's not about that. It's about giving of myself, whereas I really can start to get by helping others, and that's all I can do as a sober member of AA, in real time. You know, what I like to ask myself every day is, what can I do? What can I do to help somebody else? And it's interesting. It got lost for me at the beginning, in the 12 steps, when it tells us we try to carry this message. That's all I can do is try. I used to get frustrated and call up my sponsor all the time when I started sponsoring guys. Oh, this guy's this and he's not that. And he's not willing. I can't give somebody else willingness. All I can do is show them what I do. And I always remind myself of that. I, not that I've been around for all that long, but I recognize early on, and I had to learn through this process. And that's where I start to lean on my sponsor, right? When I start sponsoring other guys, because my intuitive thought is not necessarily in line with what it should be, but I do have a message to carry, and it reminds me that in the 9-step promises, no matter how far down the scale I've gone, my experience can benefit others, and that's all I got is my experience. So I start to step away from this idea because I'm afraid that this guy's not going to get it. All I need to do is try. I have started step work with more guys than I've taken through the steps. And I think that's probably most of our experiences, but that doesn't matter. It's the idea that I'm willing to do that I'm willing to try, because that's all I can ever do in real time. As I said, I recognize that it's a paradigm shift that occurs internally with me in my whole perception of the world and the people in it. And that's what changes for me. And that's what my sobriety looks like today. And I guess it's almost time to wind this up, right? This meeting ends like in another couple of minutes, but I'll just kind of end with this. As I said, it's about a shift in perspective, because I know very little and I'm often quite wrong. And that's a great place to be. That is a great place to be. That's where freedom starts for me. Not being that guy that thinks he knows. I was very black and white in my perception of the world. I knew, and you couldn't tell me any different. And it goes back to that idea when someone said to me, hey, why don't you come to AA? My first reaction was, no, certainly not. My resistance. So I'm going to use a quote from one of my favorite bands, the Grateful Dead. It's a song called Scarlet Begonias, and the quote is this: once in a while, we get shown the light in the strangest of places if we look at it right. That, to me, personifies what AA is all about. It's about the ability, as Chuck Chamberlain would say, to put on a new pair of glasses, and I can see things. They were there all the time. My perception was askew, but I changed that perception and that perspective, because my disease, the disease of alcoholism, while sober, that's where it manifests itself, in my perception of things. How free do I want to be? And that's what I ask myself. So if you're new, please get a sponsor. Start working the steps, because that's where the real freedom from alcoholism occurs. My alcoholism, I recognize, needs to be treated on a daily basis. Either I'm going to treat it through the 12 steps, which are spiritual principles that I can apply in my life, or I'm going to wind up picking up a drink, God forbid, because I drink autonomically. I'm an alcoholic. I'm programmed to drink. And it's only by the grace of a loving God that I'm sober today. And I thank you very much for listening. I hope I said something that may have resonated with someone, and I greatly appreciate it. Thank you.